Greetings, Exiles and Exiles in Training. BullShifter here, and today, Legion has arrived. Now, I wanted to do another beginner's video simply because of the fact that with every new league that comes around, there's typically a surplus of new players, and with that, more players looking for some guidance on exactly what they should be doing early on in game, and just some basic early on info. So this guide is more or less built for brand new players to the game, players who have maybe been away from the game for a long period of time, or just players who haven't really played a whole lot. If you are a more experienced player, a lot of this is going to be redundant, likely until we get to some of the more Legion-specific things, which are going to make up a relatively small portion of the video. I more or less wanted to make more of a concentrated video for beginners who haven't played before. I do have the other two beginners guides that are on here. However, I wanted to kind of condense and just keep this video a bit more focused than those two are. So to start off with, when you begin the game, you'll want to go ahead and create a new character, and this will actually bring up the different leagues that you can play in. Now, Standard League is, as it says there, the default game mode, so this isn't going to have any of the special league content. League content is just special content. New leagues occur pretty much every 3 months, and there's just another element that's added onto the game that isn't in the standard game. You can also earn a few extra rewards through playing the different leagues by completing challenges, and typically every 12 rewards or 12 challenges that you finish, you'll get some sort of cosmetic reward based on that league. So Legion is actually the league that just started today. Along with the Legion League comes a huge patch that is buffing melee characters, adding a bunch of new items, new skill gems, and just a lot more to the game in general. Now, the melee changes aren't just for Legion, they are for Standard and Hardcore Legion as well, so keep that in mind that you will get the benefits of the different changes to melee in all of the said leagues. So Hardcore Legion is the same as Legion, except for if you die in Hardcore Legion, your character is reverted to Standard. Now, this is risky because of the fact that if you are looking to play specifically the Legion League, if you die in Hardcore, you will no longer be in Legion League, you will be in Standard. So you will no longer be able to play the Legion content with that character. Now, there is one other type of game mode that you can play. These are all standard to where you can trade and play with other players. If you hit R1, when hovering over one of these, you can actually toggle the solo self-found mode, which is exactly how it sounds. You play by yourself, you loot your own items, and you can't trade with anyone. So for beginners, I would recommend the Standard Legion League. So you'll go ahead and select your league, and then it's going to ask you to select your character. Now, just a quick tidbit of information before we get into the actual characters themselves. Each character is going to be represented, or, well, is going to focus on certain attributes. There are 3 main attributes in the game: strength, intelligence, and dexterity. Strength is typically going to be represented by the color red throughout the game. For every 10 points of strength that you have on your character, you will gain 5 extra life and 2% extra physical damage. Intelligence will typically be notated by the color blue throughout the game. For every 10 points of intelligence, you will gain an extra 5 mana and an extra 2% to your energy shield. Dexterity is the last attribute. It will typically be represented by the color green, and for every 10 points of dexterity, you will gain 20 accuracy and 2% extra evasion. So each one of these characters kind of has a focus on where they start in the skill tree that is somewhat based off of those stats. So the Templar here is kind of one of the more balanced characters in the game. He is a strength and intelligence based character. The Shadow is kind of based more on attack speed and critical strikes because of the amount of times that he is striking with those faster attacks, and he is based off of intelligence and dexterity for the most part. The Marauder is a pure strength-based build, and he has a very solid melee focus. The Scion is actually not unlocked until you've completed Act 3 in some form of League or Standard mode, and she actually starts in the very middle of the skill tree, so she can kind of branch off in any area that you would like, which leads to more possibilities, however a higher probability for failure if you don't keep your build focused. The Ranger is obviously a ranged build, focusing on bow attacks, and is dexterity based. The duelist is a strength and dexterity based. He has a lot of attack damage, as well as some, special nodes that can potentially cause bleed, impale, and other type of ailments. The witch is the pure intel based, and she focuses on spells and does also have a lot of minion nodes near her tree, which is very good for her necromancer ascendancy. So for this league, I've decided to run a duelist. So we will select our character and name them. Now, something to keep in mind about your naming conventions for your characters is that you can't actually name different characters the same name. So if you have a standard name that you typically go with, you're going to have to modify it a little bit here and there in order to have the same name. So we'll go ahead and start from here. And after you select your character, it will start you in kind of the beginning tutorial area that you hit before you go to the first hub. Now in this area, it's going to take us through some basic tutorials in the game. However, there are a few menus that I do want to show you before we really get off and running through this area that may or may not be useful to you depending on kind of your individual playstyle. So we load in here on this island, and we're just kind of passed out. They're going to put our first weapon in front of us there. However, what I want to look at here, if we go to our options screen, there's a few options you may want to play around with a little bit. A lot of these I would leave on by default if they've already been left on. But a few things that are adjustable that they don't really tell you a lot about in the game. If you decide to use the overhead map instead of the mini-map, landscape transparency will be what makes the map easier to see through, so that way you can actually see what's going on in the game as well as seeing the overhead map at the same time. Map zoom is self-explanatory. It will zoom the map in and out based on how far that slider is out. Always showing sockets will always show the sockets that are in your item, and we'll go over sockets here in just a moment. Full item descriptions is super useful. It'll actually tell you the tiers of the different modifiers or affixes on your different items, and whether they are prefix or suffix modifiers, which comes in handy when you're doing crafting on top of items. You can show your life and mana levels to actually see a flat number up on your actual life and mana bars. And another one that is super useful would be your item filters. Now starting off, you're going to want to keep it pretty much at the default or soft level, so that way you're seeing pretty much all the items that drop, just because early on you're going to want to pick up a lot of items to vendor just to kind of gain a base currency, gain some different scrolls to kind of help you out in the very early game. Now as you progress through, you'll want to go ahead and move it up. I typically keep mine around semi-strict or strict when I get into the later game, just because that way it's going to show you less of those kind of trash items that you're not necessarily going to need at that point in the game. So we'll keep it at soft for now. And we'll move on from there. The challenges, so these are the league challenges I was telling you about, and again, every 12 challenges you complete, you will get a cosmetic microtransaction rewarded to you. These can take quite some time to fulfill, so the earlier you start the league, the better. So we'll go here, pick up our first item. Now that auto-equipped just because we don't actually have an item set there, but if we pick up another one-handed weapon, it will essentially put it here in our inventory for us to equip manually. So we'll talk to this guy here, and he's going to get attacked by a zombie. Now at this point, all we have is our base attack with X until this drops. So this is a skill gem. So we'll go into our inventory by hitting the large middle button, and we can go ahead and hover over this skill gem. So it's given us Double Strike, which is a melee strike physical attack. And you can kind of read through here, and it'll tell you exactly what the skill does. It's showing us this little video here, kind of giving us an idea of exactly how to equip. So if we hit X to socket, we can actually put that here in our item, and once a skill gem is in your item, you can actually go ahead and equip it. Now one thing I do want to note before we leave the screen and look into equipping skills is this item itself, it has two sockets. It has a green and a red. Now different items can have different amount of sockets. A chest piece and a two-handed weapon can both have 6 sockets, which can all be linked. Links are represented by that little gold kind of diamond looking thing that is linking the two sockets together. If it's not linked, there won't be anything there, there'll just be two sockets. So at specific levels of items, you can gain more sockets. The maximum, as I had mentioned, is 6, which can be obtained on a chest piece and a two-handed weapon. It cannot be obtained on a one-handed weapon. That can only get up to 3 sockets. A helmet can get up to 4. A shield or a secondary one-handed weapon can also only get 3. Boots can only get 4. Gloves can only get 4. And your different items and jewelry, such as your rings or amulet, can only get 1. And belts will typically only have an abyssal jewel socket, which we're not really going to cover here because that's kind of extra content that you'll run into later on in the game. So with these sockets, each socket has a different color. Now, as we had mentioned in the beginning of the video, most colors represent a direct attribute. So if we hover over this, the green gem, green again represents dexterity. So if we look at the actual requirements for the item later on, it will actually tell us what specific level we'll need to equip that item, and green will be based off of a certain amount of dexterity, which if we go to our character, we can actually see our strength, intelligence, and dexterity levels. Now this early on in the game, there's not really going to be any requirements for, the very first level 1 gem. However, as we level gems, and gems will level as we have them equipped and we gain experience ourselves, our gems will gain experience with us. And they can level up to level 20 on their own. There are items that can add additional levels. However, for the sake of this video, we're just going to talk about the basic leveling of the gems. So as a green gem gets higher in level, it's going to require more dexterity for you to be able to use it. So you actually do have to somewhat balance your strength, intelligence, and dexterity stats using this. Now also in this little screen here, you can see your life, mana, energy shield, evasion, and resistances, as well as some other stats below that. Resistances cap out at 75%, and it is recommended that you get to that 75% as soon as possible, because as you progress through the game, that is going to be the biggest key to staying alive, is having capped resistances, having a high amount of life, and also having a secondary form of defense, which can include different things such as energy shield, armor, dodge, evasion, and different gem combinations, which can also add levels of defensive layering to your build, which is something that you can kind of play around with gem setups. You can look at some different builds online to see what other people have kind of done, just to get an overall general idea of how to use defensive layering. However, that's kind of getting into some more complicated things, so we're going to scale back just a little bit here. Now, there are 2 different types of gems. Double Strike is a skill gem, so it provides a direct skill to our character. Now, in order to equip that skill, we can actually click down on the right stick, which is R3, and it will then let us assign to one of the 4 buttons on our controller: square, triangle, circle, or X. And if we hold R2, it's actually a modifier to allow us to have 4 more skills. So if we held R2 and assigned it to triangle, we would be able to use that skill then by holding R2 and hitting triangle. So it corresponds with whichever button you actually assign it to. So by default here, it's actually assigned it to square. So it's already assigned, so we will go ahead and move forward with that skill gem. So moving forward, we're going to run into a few more basic enemies. A lot of these early game enemies are going to go down with relative ease. As you can see, Double Strike takes them down pretty quickly. Open this chest, and this is actually going to bring us to the other type of gem that you can get. So this circular gem here is a support gem. Most support gems will have kind of a circular shape to them, and they will all say support at the end of them. So this is a chance to bleed support gem. Now, as you'll notice to the left of it, when you hover over support gem, it'll actually show you your currently active skills. And if there's a green check mark next to it, it means that this is a compatible support gem, which means that if we equip this into the same item that is directly linked or just fully linked to that skill gem, it will actually provide these benefits that are described in the support gem to that active skill gem. So if we socket this, our double strike now actually has a chance to cause our enemies to bleed, and will do a little bit of extra damage. So nearly every skill gem in this game is viable in some shape, way, or form, and the way that they're made more powerful and more viable in your builds is by putting solid support gems on those. Now, much like your skill gems, your support gems also level with you, and you'll also notice this mana multiplier. A lot of different skills will require a mana cost, and support gems will actually increase that cost. So 110% mana multiplier is exactly as it sounds. Our mana cost is multiplied by 110%. So essentially it's going to cost just a little bit more. It's not going to be 100% of, the same, it's going to be 110%. And as you stack more support gems, the more expensive your skills will be, so you'll also want to pay somewhat attention to your mana. However, there are certain passives in the passive skill tree that you can use to spend life instead, but we won't get too in detail with that either. So at this point, since these are linked, we have them supporting one another, and again, chance to bleed support being a red gem, it is going to have a strength cost, so you'll also want to make sure that you are buffing up your strength statistic. Most builds in the game are going to use a combination of blue, green, and red gems, so it's just something you're going to want to pay attention to as you play the game. Now, early on, we are going to hope to loot some items for a couple of reasons. One, obviously right now all we have equipped is a weapon. See, now we have some gloves, and again, those auto-equipped. Now, something to keep in mind is attack gems can be slotted into any item. So it's not that they necessarily only have to be slotted into your weapons. You could slot them into your boots, your helmet, your chest piece. It doesn't matter. It will still, it's not that armor can only have defensive and weapon can only have attack and spell. You can assign them wherever they are fitting or wherever they are the most useful. As you see there, I used a mana and a health file, as you can see in the lower left hand corner. And in our inventory here, you can also equip flasks, which in the beginning you'll pick up primarily life and mana flasks, although there are others that you'll pick up through the course of the game that can also increase your speed, resistances, attacks, and other numerous stats in the game. So in the beginning, you will find yourself attacking some more, random individual enemies in the very, very beginning. However, as you progress on through the game, you can kind of speed through a little bit and actually skip past a lot of these enemies. If you hit down on the D-pad, you can actually toggle between the mini-map and the overhead map. When you have the overhead map up, where the mini-map normally would be, it's going to give you more information about the area that you're in. So here we can see that the monsters are monster level 1. So that means that ideally you should be around level 1. So if we were around like level 5, we wouldn't really want to stick around this area because it's not going to provide much experience, it's not going to provide very high level items, it's just not going to be very beneficial to us in general. So this is Hillock. This is actually who we want to rush in the very beginning of the game and defeat. He's the first, I guess you'd call him a boss of the area. It's nice not to be dead yet. So he's gone ahead and dropped us some items. Early on, we're actually just going to pick all these up because we're just going to sell them to the vendor in the very first area. Now, as you'll see, we have actually gained a skill point that we can assign in our passive tree. Now, we'll zoom out here, and as you can see, this is probably the most complicated and daunting part of the game. However, before you get super intimidated about the passive tree, there are a lot of ways to simplify this. So as I had mentioned earlier, different characters start at different areas of the passive tree. If you see these little round kind of icons here, they each represent a different character. So we're playing the duelist, and this is where we start on the passive tree. Now, you're really only going to be able to build out so far, so everything up here is stuff we're not going to reach. So we can essentially ignore these nodes. None of these are going to matter. We're not going to be able to build towards those unless we make an extreme effort to build up towards those, which normally isn't going to make sense for our build. We're typically going to, try to branch out in one direction to pick up skill nodes that make more sense for our class, although there are definitely exceptions, so just keep that in mind. Now, there are a few things that will make this a bit easier. If you hit L3 and left on the D-pad, there's actually a search function. So say I search life because I want some life nodes. I want to stack up my life higher. If I search that, it's actually going to highlight and pulsate any nodes that have anything to do with life. Now, if you want to get more specific, you can actually put quotations around it and say I want life regen. Now, if I search that with quotations around it, it's only going to give me nodes that specifically are for life regen. Now, throughout the tree, there will be smaller nodes, which will give you stat boosts, but the biggest thing you're going to focus on are these larger nodes, and these even larger nodes like these. These are going to provide greater benefits, and these are typically what you're going to be branching out towards. Now, that's not to say that these smaller nodes aren't important for the small increase in percentage that they'll give you for specific skills and attributes, but these other larger ones are just too big to ignore and are typically what you're building out towards. A lot of the times, once you've kind of finished building up for a lot of those that you need for your build, you'll also pick up jewel sockets for another item in the game called jewels, which can also give some pretty hefty benefits if you've looted a rare or unique jewel that you can slot directly into your passive tree. Now, there are a few other things that you can do to kind of make this easier. You can go online to the forums specifically, and there are a lot of different builds that other people have made and posted. If you're not necessarily comfortable kind of delving into this yourself, you can always follow someone else's guide if you'd like, or just kind of browse a few different guides to kind of get an idea to see what type of nodes that people take. If you are feeling adventurous though, and I would recommend that you kind of take some chances and try your own build, there's just a few things to keep in mind when you're doing so. One, there are some great resources online for you to use. If you have any computer, doesn't really even have to be that great of a computer, there is a program you can download called Path of Building. Now, what Path of Building will do is it will actually allow you to preliminarily make your own build without actually assigning skill points in game. So you can kind of experiment around. It'll show you statistics, it'll show you what your different stats end up being at for the different nodes you've picked up, the skill gems you have, and even items you've decided to equip through the program. So basically, it's a good way to actually plan your build before you start building, so that way you don't make mistakes. Because you are given a limited amount of refund points. So that's another thing. You don't want to go ahead and just start randomly assigning points. Everything should make sense. Everything should synergize. For example, there are nodes that give special stat boosts to specific item types. If we go down here, these are good examples. So here are a few nodes that give, different benefits to axes. And there are others that will give benefits to maces. I wouldn't want to take both of these. It just wouldn't make sense because I'm essentially wasting stats. Skill points are very precious, so you want to assign them intelligently. You should always grab a lot of life nodes. Life is very important in the game. Survivability is definitely rewarded in this game. DPS is important as well. However, if you don't have enough survivability, some of the enemies in this game will hit very hard. So as I mentioned earlier, you always want capped resistances, very high health, and to actually have some sort of secondary defense and defensive layering built into your character. We're getting attacked here. I should probably move off to a little secluded area. So back into our passive tree. Again, like I said, make sure that just your skills make sense and that they work together, and that you're not grabbing nodes that, are one-handed damage and two-handed damage. Go in with an idea of what you want to do with your build, maybe base it around a skill gem or an item that you want to obtain throughout the game, and just know what you're doing ahead of time as opposed to kind of assigning some points willy-nilly, because it's just going to be really detrimental to your build and your character later on. Another program or website that I like to use is a website. It's poedb.tw. It's another great resource that'll actually show you all the different items and skill gems within the game, and along with showing you the different skill gems, it'll actually show you on each skill gems page what support gems can be used with those skill gems, which I essentially like to use that with Path of Building to kind of give me a good idea of which items, which skill gems, basically everything, and how I want to place it. So again, this passive tree is very large. Don't be intimidated by it, because eventually you're going to create enough builds throughout the game and through playing that this is going to become kind of second nature. It's going to feel a lot more natural, and a lot of these nodes you're going to realize a lot of these smaller ones repeat, and it ends up becoming kind of obvious which nodes you want to pick up. Your build doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to make sense and it has to work together. And as long as you do those things, you should still build a pretty solid build through the passive skill tree. Don't be afraid of failing and trying creative things. Everyone has builds that fail. As long as you learn what you did wrong, it was still a success. So don't be intimidated by that by any means. Now, something you will want to experiment with when it comes towards your build is the skill gems I had mentioned earlier. Because unlike the passive tree, you can equip and unequip skill gems as much as you want. You're going to gain skill gems for rewards throughout the game. There's multiple vendors who are going to sell you all the skill gems, primarily in Act 6 early on. There's a vendor there that you can buy all the different skill gems that you've run into so far in the game. And again, after Act 10, there'll be another vendor that you can essentially purchase just about any skill gem from. So that's just something to keep in mind. Each character will also have different skill gems that they have access to early game. So one thing you can do if one character has a skill gem that you want to use on a different character early game is simply start another character and kind of use them to mule over a skill gem that you want that your character may not necessarily start the game with. So that's the passive skill tree. We actually didn't assign our point, so I want to actually start with a little bit of increased attack speed, just because that's actually how I started this build on Path of Building. So from here we actually enter our first hub, Lionized Watch. Now there's multiple things that you can do in each hub. There will be a waypoint where you can use to travel to different areas on the map. Your stash will also be here, which will actually show everything that you've stashed so far. And you're actually able to purchase more of these tabs and different specific tabs in the microtransaction shop, which is just on the options screen. You can talk to the multiple NPCs. Anyone with an exclamation point over their head has something important to tell you, and sometimes they will potentially give you either rewards or missions. So for this, he's actually the one we completed that first mission for, so we're going to take a skill gem from him. Now, one thing you may notice when you're first starting a new build, now if you use Path of Building, or you're following a build guide, or you just have a general idea of skill gems you want to use, typically it's not going to be one of the very first gems that you run into in the game. So you're going to want something to supplement and something to help you run your build until then. Now, there's a lot of different skill gems you can use, obviously, but my recommendation would be to start off with something that actually matches what you're building towards. So for this character, Molten Strike wouldn't make a lot of sense because I'm not building a fire build. It's going to be a purely physical damage build. Same with Shrapnel Shot, I'm not using bows or any sort of ranged attacks. So Perforate or Cleave would make the most sense. Just for fun, because I haven't really used Perforate very much in the past, I'll just use that skill for now, and it should get us by just fine. We have multiple different slots we can equip it in, so we'll throw that in there, and we can actually equip this into our offhand to up our attack a little bit. Now early on, as I had mentioned, we're going to go ahead and sell off a lot of these extra items. The reason we're going to do that is to build up currency. Now, white items don't offer a whole lot. They're just going to give us scroll fragments, which will help us build a Scroll of Wisdom, which are used for identifying items, and early on you can actually buy some items from these different NPCs. And typically early on they will cost either Scrolls of Wisdom or Portal Scrolls, which are the two different types of scrolls in the game. So we'll go ahead and accept this trade. Now this Life Flask, it's an upgrade from these. We can't actually use it yet though because we are not level 3, but we'll hold on to that for once we get to that point where we're ready to level up. Now, keep in mind that as item rarity increases, you're going to get better currency for those items. I do have a video that you can check out on this channel that is strictly about different vendor recipes and the different items that you can trade in order to get different currencies throughout the game. Currencies are important because not only are they used to purchase items, but they're also used for crafting. They have a dual purpose. There's not just strictly gold in this game where you just give an NPC gold and get items. A good example is if we go to Tarkley here and purchase items. As I had mentioned, he's actually going to sell us these for Scrolls of Wisdom. Now, one item that can be super useful if you can find it early game, and it's what you're going to be looking for, are any sort of boots or shoes, that have movement speed attached to them. Unfortunately, we don't have any here. However, after we level up, we can go ahead and check back with him to see if he's gained any at that point. Movement speed is important throughout the game, especially early on, just because we don't have a movement skill yet to help us actually move through the game quicker. And the main idea behind the game is that we're going to want to rush through the story acts, finish Act 10, and start mapping. Mapping is what the end game content is. It's basically our overall goal. Maps come in tiers from tier 1 to tier 16. It's where the better loot is. Maps are randomly generated except for the boss at the end, which is typically the same, but they just give better rewards. Different missions can appear within them as well that relate to past league content from different masters throughout the game, which I also have some videos on my YouTube explaining those, such as Delve, Incursion, and other past league mechanics that have made their way into the main game. So early on, obviously we want movement boots, we want to start building our currency base, and as we move through different areas of the game, we want to unlock different waypoints that will look like this. So that way we can go ahead and travel to them. Now this is the map. You can view that from the waypoint or from the world map here. Something to make note of is our missions you can toggle through using the D-pad. Now there are two different colored backgrounds for these different missions, or I guess they're more borders. Gold will be a main mission. These are missions we have to do in order to progress through the game. We will also get side missions that will have a blue border. Now those can be super useful just because of the fact that they will sometimes give us passive skill points or even respec points in order to respec some of the passive skill points that we've spent. However, I would not recommend using those right away. Try to save them for end game, so that way if you do need to make some tweaks to your tree, you can do it at that point when you have a much better idea and clear vision as to exactly where you're going. Now keep in mind that you can travel from waypoints if you've unlocked them. You cannot travel from the world map, so that is the biggest difference there. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the coast, and we're going to try to essentially run into the Legion content of the game. Now Legion is the league that is currently going. And essentially what we're going to be doing is entering an area where there are going to be enemies that are frozen in time. Now we will have a timer to actually attack those enemies, which will cause them to unfreeze. And once they do, we will then be able to defeat them for different items and rewards. So typically during leagues, any area you enter in will usually have the different league content within it. There are some exceptions. The Labyrinth will not have them all the time, and neither will the Delve. The Delve typically does not have them either. Now, as you can see, we are level 2, and this is a level 2 area, so we're actually right on pace for where we should be. One thing we do want to make sure that we don't do is we don't want to spend too much time focusing on attacking enemies. Just because, one, it's going to slow down our play, and we don't necessarily want to over level in areas just because then the actual items that we're getting from the levels aren't going to be as good. And we are also going to gain less experience from those areas as well. Because the best way to gain experience is to be in areas that are of the same level as you. So this little icon on our overhead map here, that's the Timeless Monolith, and that's actually what's going to unlock that League content that I had mentioned. So we're actually being followed by quite a few enemies here. Now mobs like this should actually give us a decent amount of experience, especially early on. It is just a low level mob. However, since we're not very high level and it is on pace with the level that we're at currently, it should be beneficial for us. Now early on, if you do die, it's not a huge deal. You're not going to gain a penalty. However, after Acts 5 and Act 10, you do start to gain penalties for dying. So that's something you want to be careful to not do. And this may actually be a bit of a challenging fight. A lot of these unique, and you can tell by the different colors that they are, if they're unique or not. A lot of these unique enemies you may not necessarily want to fight early on, just because as you can see, they take a lot of time to kill, and they're very challenging. They should drop decent items. However, as you can see there, we died, which, you know, we're not fully equipped with items, so we are definitely more vulnerable right now, and now we actually have to come all the way back from the beginning waypoint of the area. Well, not waypoint, but the entryway to this area. And run all the way back there without any movement skill or movement boots. So it basically slowed down our progression quite a bit.
It seems this new arena suits me. I believe in
now, as you can see there, we did gain some pretty decent items. And Orb of Transmutation, so that's actually a currency item that we just gained. Try and pick up a few things here just to be a little bit stronger early on, and you're really going to see the difference when you actually fully gear out. But this, we will move into a different item and discard that so we can actually pick up this blue. We'll identify that and equip it. So now we'll go ahead and head into the Timeless Monolith, and we'll actually go ahead and check out the content. So see here, these are these frozen enemies I was talking about. Now we're looking for enemies, for the most part, that have these little icons above them. So there we unlocked a chest, so that's going to give us a little bonus reward. We're running out of time here, however. As you can see, we've only got 3 more seconds to go. We unlock that chest. So now these enemies show up in our normal world. We're going to go ahead and defeat these enemies just to get them out of our way. And I'm hoping... we did not. So there's different items that you can get within the new League content called incubators, and incubators essentially allow you to apply you basically apply it to an item the same way that you would a crafting currency. And what it does is it will tell you get such and such amount of kills while this is equipped, and you will get a specific reward for it. So say we had a currency one. After killing a certain amount of enemies, it would fully fill the meter, and we would be rewarded with currency. There's multiple different incubators throughout the League, and that's essentially our main reward, at least early on, from what I've seen so far, to actually running those Timeless Monoliths. That's kind of the main goal there. So that kind of explains the basic League mechanics, the different things that you want to do as you're starting off the game. Definitely feel free to subscribe to my channel and check out some of my other videos for some of the other content that you'll run throughout the game. As I said, I've created a beginner's guide once before. However, I just wanted to create a more focused one, and one that kind of focused on a few of the things that have changed for this League, just because each League is a little different. I won't be making a early beginner's guide for every single League, but I just wanted to kind of make an improved guide compared to the first one that I had made, just for the influx of new players who are likely coming in. It's just the second league of the game, and recently GGG had their highest concurrent player count on PC for this league, so I assumed PlayStation 4 would have a lot of newer players coming in as well, so I wanted to make a new video for those players. So I hope you learned a lot. Definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel to check out future videos and to check out some of those past videos for any other content in the game that you may have questions on or want to learn more about. I also stream on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8:30 Central Standard Time, which is actually about right now at the time of recording, so my stream will be starting a bit late tonight, but my Twitch is the BullShifter, which is the same as my character name for this character. You can see it in the upper left hand corner there. Go ahead, follow me on Twitch if you'd like to see me stream and kind of chat with me there. I do answer as many questions as I possibly can during stream, and it's kind of just meant for a way for me to be able to interact with followers and just kind of have some fun. I do try and be informative as possible, but we definitely do just have some normal chats and just kick back and relax, and it's a relaxed, safe environment, family friendly. I just like to basically chat with subs and have a good time. So again, thanks for checking out this video. I hope you've learned quite a bit for all you newer players out there, and even for some of you who are veterans of the game. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the new league content if you did sit through the video. So until next time, may the RNG be with you. Always.